Hey, what's going on everyone? It's Dom from Lensprotogo and Lens Rentals. Welcome back to the channel. As you can see, I've got two gimbal setups here in front of me, one with the RED Komodo 6K and the other with the Sony FX6. Two cameras I absolutely love in their own respects, but these cameras absolutely have this one thing in common. They're excellent gimbal cameras. Hence, the setups you see in front of you. I've got each of these cameras on a DJI RS2 gimbal because in this video, I want to find out the answer to this question. Which is the better gimbal camera? So to figure this out, we're going to be talking about things like the build and design choices of these cameras in terms of compatibility with a gimbal. We're also going to talk about the tech going on in each of these cameras and how that's going to affect gimbal workflow, and other things too that you might find makes one of these cameras more gimbal friendly than the other. So with all that out of the way, let's do this thing. Alright, so these cameras, just the bodies themselves, weigh about the same, pretty much 2 pounds on the nose, but the RED is smaller. The FX6 is a few centimeters longer and taller. Which brings me to the lens mounts. They sit in much different positions on each of these cameras. The FX6 being slightly taller, the mount is higher up on the body, giving it a higher center of gravity when the lens is attached, meaning it will sit a bit lower on the tilt axis of your gimbal. And in my opinion, this is a plus because you'll run into less clearance issues if the camera sits lower in the gimbal, and we're about to see an example of that in a second. So moving on to the Komodo's setup, its smaller body is going to give it that much more of a chance of getting a small cine lens on there, like this Sigma 24 I have on it now. And now this is a really neat little cine gimbal right here that I've been having a lot of fun with. But it comes with one caveat. It's technically improperly balanced. I actually had to lower the camera on the tilt axis to allow me that clearance, that thing that we were just talking about with the FX6. And even with this adjustment, it still dips forward a little bit when the motors are off, but it powers on like a champ, and the gimbal doesn't seem to hate the way it's balanced, and the result is awesome. Geared follow focus on the cine lens in a very, very neat little rig. Now, if I tried to put the same lens on the FX6, and actually this is the E-mount, so it's not even getting adapted, so it should be even easier, the overall length is just too much to counter the clearance problem, and it didn't even have a motor on it yet. However, I understand that this is just one gimbal I'm trying it on, and a relatively small one in the grand scheme of gimbals, and you probably wouldn't run into any of these issues on a full-size gimbal, or even a Zhiyun crane with that extendable arm. But that difference in body size did make the difference between getting a small cine lens on this rig and not, so that's just something to think about. So I had the best experience with regular old Sony lenses for the FX6's rig. And right here I have the 24mm G Master. The only thing with this lens is I almost had the opposite problem. This is a really, really light lens, so I had to mount the FX6 awkwardly frontwards on the gimbal plate, and even off the RS2's little gear system down here. So what I ended up doing was putting a thread adapter on the quick release plate from the RS2 kit, and I got it mounted on the 3/8 thread on the bottom of the FX6 instead of the 1/4-20. This made all the difference, and this allowed me to balance it a lot less awkwardly, it set it back a little bit more, and it got me back on track, literally. Honestly though, all in all, both of the builds of these cameras are very gimbal friendly. They're each essentially just like little camera cubes, which is obviously exactly what you want. And any problems that I ran into were probably because I was pushing the limits. Let's talk about video outputs. The Komodo has one singular SDI output down here, and it's in a fine spot down here in the bottom underneath the batteries. But if you're pushing the limits of clearance like I kind of was, an angled SDI adapter helps a lot. The FX6 has one HDMI and one SDI, and those are set in a bit here on the right side, so no clearance issues there. So here's another thing to consider, operating the camera while it's on the gimbal. So with the FX6, for example, outside of using the menu obviously, everything on the FX6 is done on the left side of the camera. So any adjustment like ND or something can be made pretty easily while holding the gimbal in place and even while composing a shot. Where on the Komodo, all controls are done on the top via that small touchscreen, so you're probably setting it down to make any changes unless you have a monitor that allows for RED camera control. And that's a total workflow thing, and honestly a lot of these things I'm talking about are going to come down to the type of workflow that you're needing out of your gimbal camera. Do you need to be able to make adjustments on the fly while it's recording and while a shot is happening? or maybe you're in your gimbal work, you have time to change settings after or in between shots, or you're just not really changing settings much at all. So that's just like another thing to think about. But here's another workflow thing: focusing on these cameras. The FX6's continuous autofocus performs very well, with a lot of options for fine tuning, amazing face and eye detection, and it has a large autofocus area. While the Komodo does have decent continuous autofocus that's still in beta, it jitters a bit and searches a bit harder when it doesn't have an obvious subject in the frame. And it will need to be touchscreen selected from the top, which is kind of awkwardly done, unless, like I said, you had that small HD indie monitor with touchscreen RED control. That would help a lot. Autofocus aside, you can obviously manually focus either of these rigs with the use of a focus motor, and I'm using the one that comes with the RS2 kit, although both of these setups, how I have them right now, offer ample space to get your own fizz motors in there. Although the Komodo setup is a little bit tight in there, you could probably raise it off the rails pretty easily if need be. The RS2 does another really neat thing too, where it actually allows you to focus the lens through the camera's lens communication with compatible lenses. Unfortunately, I'm not able to do that on either of these cameras today for different reasons. Because on the Komodo, there's no USB-C port on the body itself. So I would need a couple $100 link adapter to get the RS2 hooked up to the Komodo via USB-C. And the problem with the FX6 is it has this USB multi-port right here that's even in a great spot, but this camera is not compatible with the RS2 yet in that way. Maybe that'll come in a future firmware release, but that's kind of a bummer because the ability to use that little front dial right there to manually focus the lens without the use of any focus motors or anything was really, really handy, even if it was just focus by wire. Also, focus aside, this is how you got other camera control options to work on these cameras, like remote shutter control, which I know a lot of people like in their gimbal work. Here's another point where these two cameras are definitely going to differ: monitoring. On the Komodo, monitoring using that top LCD display is pretty much out of the picture. It's really hard to compose off of, even when you're looking directly at it. So it really requires an external monitor. So I've got a Shinobi hooked up down here via SDI, which is the Komodo's only video out option. And as I've mentioned before, if this was the small HD Indy 7 monitor, I would have touchscreen RED Komodo control, which would totally take this rig to the next level. The FX6 has SDI and HDMI, as we mentioned, so if you wanted, you could run an operator's monitor and a video accessory like a wireless video transmitter simultaneously, which definitely gives it that professional edge over the out-of-the-box Komodo. However, if you wanted to go an even more simple direction, like the shoot you're doing isn't really that crazy, you don't even really need a third-party monitor for the FX6. The monitor that comes with it can be mounted on top, and in the orientation I have it in now, it is full clearance and is pretty much totally adjustable. So this is going to eliminate the hassle of getting an external monitor hooked up, getting video to it, getting it powered on. It's also going to free up all the video outputs on the FX6, and maybe most importantly, this is keeping this rig super, super lightweight. I know they're in like super different builds right now, but just for reference, this Komodo build is 12.25 pounds as is, and this really bare bones FX6 rig is like 8.15, I'm pretty sure. All right, so I've gone on and on about each of these cameras, but I haven't even talked about image or recording modes yet when it comes to gimbal work. So each of these cameras are capable of shooting raw video, and you're like, what does that have to do with gimbals? Well, on the FX6, that's gonna have to be done on an external monitor, and in that case, you will need an external recorder like this Ninja. One thing the FX6 does do internally though, NDs. And not only that, it has that awesome auto ND feature, so if you were doing gimbal work in like an environment where there was unpredictable or changing exposure levels, and you're obviously hands off the camera, that's going to take care of that for you, and that is super cool. Another thing that might be really easy to overlook though with the Komodo is that global shutter readout, which is going to virtually eliminate any signs of rolling shutter, which can definitely become noticeable in gimbal movements, or even within your shot like bike spokes or spinning car tires. Although I gotta say that the FX6 handled this rolling shutter test really nicely, but the Komodo's is like perfection. Okay, two more things there. The FX6 is a full-frame camera, and the RED Komodo 6K is a Super 35 image sensor. So there you're going to have that difference in field of view from one lens to the other. And two, the FX6 can record 4K at 120 frames per second, where currently you can only record up to 60 frames per second on the Komodo. And slow-mo and gimbal work kind of go hand in hand, maybe not exclusively 120 frames per second, but that's definitely something that sports shooters look at, and probably a whole lot of other people too, especially those who think of RED as a high frame rate brand. So anyway, that's going to bring me to my final thoughts about this discussion, and I suppose the answer to what I think is the better gimbal camera out of these two. So let's quickly wrap up what we talked about today. Size and weight-wise, they're pretty darn similar, but even the slight bit of length that the FX6 has on the Komodo might exclude it from use with heavier lenses. However, it's got HDMI and SDI right on the body, allowing for 2 simultaneous outputs, which is very professional. And if you're planning on changing camera settings while operating the gimbal, that's going to be a lot easier on the FX6's side panel than on the Komodo's top LCD screen. Both of these cameras will continuously autofocus, except one was made for that type of thing, and the other's AF is still in beta, making manually focusing via the RS2's kit motor the best option for focusing the Komodo, in my opinion. As for recording modes and the actual image going on, I do happen to like the image from the Komodo better. The RAW has a lot of depth, its fast readout deals with motion very well, giving the image a really pleasing look, especially with flowy gimbal shots. With that being said though, the Sony FX6's image is really close behind. I do really like it, and the difference between the two is hardly discernible at times. So that and those auto functions like the auto ND and the super intelligent autofocus, all those things pretty much make me decide that the Sony FX6 is the better gimbal camera. I just love the idea of letting the FX6's autofocus and that G Master glass lock onto my subject, allowing me to fully concentrate on getting flowy gimbal shots. Also, I don't like to overcomplicate things. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love to overcomplicate things, but if I don't have to get an external monitor on the FX6, maybe if it was like a no big deal shoot or something, I'm not gonna, and I'm just gonna use the kit monitor and put it right on top of the camera and call it a day. And this is really what it comes down to for me. If you wanted to get this really built up, you could. You could get raw video out to an external recorder / operator's monitor, and you could use the free video output to get like wireless video coming off the camera or something. And it's that type of thing that led me to choose the FX6 as the better gimbal camera out of these two. You can really get as hands-on or as hands-off as you want. So that's pretty much going to wrap up this video deciding which is the better gimbal camera between the Komodo and the FX6. And as you heard, I happen to choose the FX6, which automatically and forever objectively means that that is the correct answer. So if you want to challenge my infallibility, or you just have any questions or insights about either of these cameras, drop a comment in the comment section below and we'll start a discussion. Also, if you happen to like this video, hit it with a thumbs up button down below to let me know you liked it, and if you're not already, subscribe to the channel, and that way you'll be in the loop whenever we post new content, which is every week. So take care, and we'll see you in the next one.